Hi, this is Jen Espinosa-Goswami, and I am launching the Talking TED with Jen video mini series, and I'm super excited to kick this off with perhaps one of the most popular TED Talks of all time. She's number 2, Amy Cuddy, with her presentation on Your Body Language May Shape Who You Are. Now, before I jump into the type of feedback I would provide on her presentation skills, I do want to tell you the stats behind Amy Cuddy's talk. She delivered this 20-minute TED Talk in 2012, so it's been about a decade since she delivered this talk, to an audience in Scotland. And her video to date has over 66 million views. Now, I did pull the transcript for this particular talk, and the transcript has about 3,700 words total in her transcript. So right away, we know that her time is beyond the 18 minutes that is typically recommended for TED Talks. And I've even heard that more current TED Talks will not actually provide a recording if you exceed 18 minutes. And we also know that the average human processes or retains information at 150 words per minute. So she is easily 7,000 words beyond what we would expect to hear or retain from a talk. So I thought it was important to go over those particular stats, and I'll be providing these stats for each video that I do. Now, I am using something called a speaker feedback form. Now, this is something I use with my private client coaching clients. If you'd like a copy of this form so you can follow along with me during the release of these videos with me, then feel free to join my email list, and there'll be a link below in this description so you can get the more specific details of what I looked at, and I won't be able to summarize all of it in this video, so I thought you should know that's the best way to follow along in terms of the type of presentation feedback and evaluation I would do for these talks. Okay, so Amy Cuddy's presentation, we'll talk about it in terms of organizing by thirds. So there's the first act, there's the second act, and there's the third act. But let's get started with her intro. And let me go ahead and share the screen so we can see and hear her intro.
So I want to start by offering you a free no-tech life hack. And all it requires of you is this, that you change your posture for 2 minutes. But before I give it away, I want to ask you to right now do a little audit of your body and what you're doing with your body. So how many of you are sort of making yourself smaller? Maybe you're hunching, crossing your legs.
All right, now that we have a chance to listen to Amy in her introduction, and by the way, the introduction is a very important part of your presentation. It's good to memorize your introduction. It's good to know exactly how you're going to come out onto stage. Now, here's what I'm noticing in her first minute or two of her TED Talk. She is presenting on body language and the power of how you communicate via your body language. What are you noticing with her body language as a speaker as she enters the stage? So she rushes onto the stage. Her shoulders are a little down. Her head is a bit down. And she starts her sentence with so. And we will notice this theme throughout the rest of her presentation. This is just something for her to be aware of. If you were a coaching client of mine, I would point that out to you, and you can determine what your verbal crutch words or filler words are. Amy tends to prefer so, and she also uses and, so she'll start her sentences with and, so. And she also has another crutch, which you may pick up as you listen to the full talk on your own, is she goes, she sniffs a lot. Now, I'm not criticizing her for sniffing because I tend to do that as well as a person with asthma, but I'm just noticing that's a crutch that she falls upon from time to time, the more nervous she is. So her introduction is effective. She's right away telling you, I'm going to tell you this, but first. So she's creating anticipation. And then she's asking the audience to reflect on their own body language and how they're even sitting in their seats, which is a really good introduction to her topic. And as a public speaking coach, I would say there's an opportunity here for her to come out onto stage more powerfully, take up that space, and demonstrate the concept she'll be talking about later in this presentation. Now, I mentioned that I would break down the presentations into thirds. So her first act is her establishing her main point of body language impacts our communication with others and how others perceive us. And I would love to give a good kudos to her because she uses very powerful visuals, and she doesn't use those in the first third of her presentation, but throughout her presentation, she has very strong visuals that receives engagement from the audience. So let me go ahead and navigate towards some of the visuals that I thought she did very well with, so you can see how she's utilizing. As a TED Talk, you have to use presentation slides, and she did a really good job with her visuals. So I'd really love to peek into that and show you some of those visuals. Here you'll see on the screen, she has an interaction between some politicians. You may recognize these politicians, especially if you're from those countries. She uses a lot of news articles from the BBC. This is a really good example of powerful visuals that receives a reaction from the audience. Typically they laugh, and Amy also engages the audience through rhetorical questions. She'll end a sentence with right or am I right? Things of that nature. So those are really good techniques to engage your audience. TED Talks are not just you presenting an idea worth spreading, it is also you engaging with your audience. And those who engage their audiences tend to perform better and become the most popular TED Talks. So this is a powerful visual. She also has another visual that's very powerful, where she introduces this idea with popular figures, which we may know. First, she shows monkeys. She shows victorious folks from the animal kingdom. And then she also shows Mick Jagger and Oprah taking up space and creating the sign of victory. So she's demonstrating the importance of body language in the first part of her presentation, and she engages the audience throughout, which is a very amazing technique. Now, I will say she also tends to use text-based visuals, which may or may not be as powerful. And I'm going to navigate to one to show you an example of this. This is an example of one of the text-based visuals she uses on her slides. Now, typically, if you're going to use text on a slide, you want to make sure it's a very simple, easy to read statement. It's not necessarily a statement you will repeat, but the power of repetition cannot be undermined at all. So she used this as rather a memory device for herself to make sure she's honing in on the specific points she wants to use. So as a coach, if I was coaching Amy on this, I would have her reflect on whether these text-based slides are really as powerful as she wanted them to be during key moments of her presentation, or whether there was an opportunity for her to use more of those visuals that receive a different reaction from the audience. So that was the first third of Amy's presentation, and I will refer to her as Amy, by the way, throughout the course of this video. I also want to reflect on the second act of her presentation, which is where she sets up the study. Now, she mentioned several times from the first 4 minutes of her presentation that she's a social scientist. If you're not familiar with her, I do have her biography below this video, so you can read at length what her experience is. And I have read personally her book on this same topic before I ever watched this TED Talk. And I tried not to include anything I might have known or picked up from her book prior to watching this talk. But I think I do need to give Amy kudos for the second third of her presentation, because she distilled and refined a very specific study that she and her team developed and is bringing this idea forth. She distilled it into basically a few slides, including the importance of testosterone and cortisol, which the average person probably wouldn't know about. She did a fabulous job of distilling that information in basically a single slide, and I'll show you at what point she demonstrates that, because I think she did this particularly effective in terms of what you need to identify from her study. So she set up the study. She told us a little bit more about what the people in the study, but this slide right here is gold. It is a very simple one-page visualization of how the study was set up. On the left-hand part of the slide, you see she had her subjects spit into a tube. Then they broke up into a control group and a non-control group. The top group was doing power poses, which she introduced very well. The bottom group does low power poses. She then had them move on to a gambling activity. And finally, she had them spit back into the tube. So in terms of setting up a really complicated idea with many different factors, she did a fantastic job with this slide in particular of showcasing the parameters of the study she's sharing with her audience. Now, I want to spend most of the time focusing on the last third of her presentation, because here is where she turns away from the laughter and the engagement in the beginning and the particulars of setting up the study, which was the idea she wants to share. And then she made it applicable to the audience. So the last third of her presentation, I would say, is her most beautiful piece of this. And it's good that she's ending on a high note. And I do want to say that she gets personal and starts to tear up around minute 16 when she shares her personal story. She set this story up by saying, how do we take this research and make it meaningful? How do we change our identity in meaningful ways? And she entered with a story about her own identity. And I'm going to play this for you because I think this is the most powerful part of her presentation.
Only to feel like I'm not supposed to be here. And that really resonated with me, because I want to tell you a little story about being an imposter and feeling like I'm not supposed to be here. When I was 19, I was in a really bad car accident. I was thrown out of a car, rolled several times. I was thrown from the car, and I woke up in a head injury rehab ward, and I had been withdrawn from college. And I learned that my IQ had dropped by 2 standard deviations, which was very traumatic. I knew my IQ because I had identified with being smart, and I had been called gifted as a child. So I'm taken out of college. I keep trying to go back. They say, you're not going to finish college. Like, just, you know, there are other things for you to do, but that's not going to work out for you. So I really struggled with this. And I have to say, having your identity taken from you, your core identity, and for me it was being smart, having that taken from you, there's nothing that leaves you feeling more powerless than that. So I felt entirely powerless. I worked and worked and worked.
Now that's how Amy set up how she got to this pivotal moment in her career where she had a student who was not performing well in class. And so she set it up why it's important and meaningful to her. And then she introduced an area of the presentation that I think she became more human to us. And it's important as a speaker to find these human moments within our presentations so that our audience can better connect with us. And I'll play this briefly for you right now.
5 years in grad school, a few years, I'm at Northwestern, I moved to Harvard. I'm at Harvard, I'm not really thinking about it anymore, but for a long time I had been thinking, not supposed to be here, not supposed to be here. So the end of my first year at Harvard, a student who had not talked in class the entire semester, who I had said, look, you gotta participate or else you're gonna fail, came into my office. I really didn't know her at all. And she came in totally defeated, and she said, I'm not supposed to be here. And that was the moment for me, because 2 things happened. One was that I realized, oh my gosh, I don't feel like that anymore. I don't.
So what you're hearing there is you're hearing Amy Cuddy share a very personal human moment in the course of her presentation. Now, if I was working with her as a coach, I would encourage her to include more of that personal story and that personal element earlier in her presentation, because this is minute 18 of a 20-minute presentation. So there is an opportunity there in the first third of her presentation to perhaps remove some of the early engagement and laughter and all of the visuals she's using with famous politicians on funny body language cues and communications, and instead introduce her personal connection to this research earlier, because that will engage the audience on a different level. I understand why she structured her presentation the way she did. And I also believe that she could have refined and shortened this presentation a bit to have fewer words, to have fewer minutes, and also to get more quickly to her personal story. Overall, I would say, of course, Amy did a fabulous job. And this is not a critique of anyone's ideas during this Talking TED with Jen series. Obviously, the ideas were worth sharing, worth spreading. They went through a rigorous audition process. But I would say that Amy Cuddy did things very effectively. Now, of course, she has opportunities there in terms of the length of her talk, introducing personal story earlier. She used a lot of crutch and filler words, and she did a lot of throughout her presentation. Now, if you are on my email list and have access to the speaker feedback form, you need to get on my email list and get this, because you can use the same form and the same feedback that I provide to people when I coach with them. You can use it to take a critical look at your next presentation. But I always include at the end of the form recommended next steps. Is Amy Cuddy a wonderful TED Talk speaker? Of course she is. This is not intended to be harsh or criticizing of what she has done, but we can all improve ourselves, right? So the recommended next steps I would encourage for someone such as Amy Cuddy in this particular presentation is take a look and create awareness around your verbal crutches or your filler words. She used a lot of so at the beginning of her sentences. And there was only one key moment in the entire presentation, other than the time she started crying, is when she paused somewhat dramatically for her. She used a lot of continuous sentences. So she had opportunities to pause and allow the audience to catch up to her. So I would encourage her to practice and get more comfortable without using those verbal crutches. She also had an opportunity in the introduction of her presentation to come out more powerfully, take up the space, like demonstrate the concepts that she talks about during her presentation, and even reference back to those concepts. Her body language was kind of closed and hunched in, and I noted that even at the end of her presentation. Again, the introduction is a very powerful part of your presentation. The ending is even more powerful. I noticed when she ended, she stayed on stage, but she backed up a few steps from the audience when they started clapping for her. Now, this is a really interesting communication technique where she's intimidated. It makes it feel like she's intimidated and she's taking a step back and stepping away from it. So maybe she was nervous. She wanted to get off the stage. Maybe she was criticizing herself in her head. Regardless of what it felt like to her, what it sounded like and looked like to us is an opportunity for her to stand her ground in her own power. If she wanted to do a power pose, she could have done that, and make eye contact and smile. Is always a good way to end your presentation. And then I think it's also important to identify if she had to tighten up her presentation or edit it down a little bit, because TED Talks are supposed to be 18 minutes long and she went a few minutes over. They did not cut her off, which is fabulous, but she has an opportunity to speak fewer words and perhaps go directly into the reason why she did this research, and then include some of the laughter towards the end of her presentation. So she could certainly have flipped her ideas around. This is Jen Espinosa-Goswami. I'm a public speaking coach. I help folks improve their presentation skills. If you would like me to do this type of work with you on your next presentation, I encourage you to join my email list. I have a special Black Friday special coming up, and limited time only. All you have to do is schedule a free phone call with me to get access to this $100 off of one of my premier services on how to improve your presentation skills and delivery. In the meanwhile, I will be coming back in 2 days. I'm posting these Talking TED with Jen videos twice a week. So if you're not subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe so you get access to these videos soon. But I will be publishing my next video on Julian Treasure, who is a communication coach and a British guy as well. So you may know who Amy Cuddy is. You may not know who Julian Treasure is, but he is the next subject for this Talking TED with Jen video series. Thank you so much for following along with me. Don't forget to join my email list, link below here, so you can get more specific call to action I have for each person that I'm reviewing as part of this TED Talk series. Thank you for joining me, and make sure to share this video if you found value in it. Talk soon.